Hello everyone, how are you doing? This is Lama Fede, and I wanted to get back to you on the question that I posed on Friday last week, which is how do you measure progress? And we got some great answers from you all. So let me try to recap, and I will try to explain very briefly how do you measure progress in the Buddhist path. Now, to be very clear, when I'm talking about the Buddhist path, I'm going to talk from the point of view of where I'm standing from, right? Which is the Vajrayana. So it's a Mahayana based, but Vajrayana located view. I'm saying this because you may have some difference between the more exoteric Mahayana and especially with the Theravada, which is perfectly alright. Every single school, every single tradition has its own way of doing it, and therefore I would say that the best way was one that Lama posted, which was to ask your guru, right? Essentially, your guru, if you don't have a guru because you're not in the Vajrayana, then the Kalyana Mitra, the virtuous friend in the Mahayana, or the Ajahn, or Bande in Theravada that guides you, that's going to be the best way. Having said that, there are some general answers that we can provide. So the first one is, of course, ask the teacher, right? The second one, which was discussed, was the bhumis. Now, the bhumis are something that is quite prevalent in most of Buddhism, and essentially it's the D&D levels of Buddhism. Now, some people may say, "Hey, that's not quite correct." It kind of, I know it's not perfect, but it kind of matches. The bhumis are essentially a list of levels which you can take to go to reach the enlightenment. Call it arhatship, call it anuttara samyak sambodhi, call it jalus, whatever you want to call it. So there are several lists. There are systems like in the Theravada where you have the Sotapanna, right? And then you enter into the stream and you become an arhat. And there are the Mahayana lists which have a lot of variances. And then you have the Vajrayana list in which you have even more. Sometimes there are 10 levels, sometimes there are 13, sometimes there are 16. The main, I would say, list that most of the Mahayana agrees, and therefore the Vajrayana agrees, it's on the Avatamsaka Sutra. It's called the Dasa Bhumika, the 10 bhumis. And essentially it's a path to the practice of the Prajna Paramitas. So the first bhumi, it's the bhumi where you practice generosity. Then the second, you practice patience, and so on and so on and so on, right? It is very important. It is very important that if you want to progress in the Buddhist path, you map it out with the paramitas, right? Which means that essentially, if you're not being generous, you're not in the Buddhist path. If you're not being patient, if you're not having a good effort, if you not have enough wisdom or meditation, right? If you don't have the paramitas, you're not in the Buddhist path for the Mahayana, right? So once you perfect them, there you go. So in order to reach the sixth bhumi, which is the bhumi from which you cannot go back, you have to practice first the paramitas, right? First, generosity, then ethical conduct, shila, then patience, then effort, right? Viriya, then meditation, then wisdom. Once you get there, on the sixth, you start getting the big cities, and this is going to be the third way to which measure. Which cities can you achieve? And this is kind of a very tantric way. This is the most, let's say, purely tantric way to say, with the caveat that you can also achieve cities if you're not in the Buddhist path. But because Tantra tends to focus so much on using cities to help beings because they take bodhicitta for granted, and we're going to review bodhicitta in a minute, this is probably the way that is most common. But this is the way that we structure the P3, right? So when you finish the P3, you at least have at least the idea of Tumo, and if possible, True Light and Dream Yoga and so on. So this is another way to measure it. Hey, I'm doing these yogas, these advanced yogas, these advanced yogas are working. But for me personally, I think that for most of Buddhist teachers, the most important yardstick in which to measure everything is bodhicitta. Now remember that bodhicitta is complex. It's not just compassion for peace. It's compassion non-dually understood as non-separated from emptiness. So you're compassionate to beings that do not actually exist, and your compassion does not exist, and you are not actually existent. At the same time, you are compassionate. It's a difficult thing to realize. So the realization of bodhicitta, it's the true measure for myself of any good Buddhist. Why do I focus so much on that? Because all the rest can be faked or can be got without essentially needed to be a good Buddhist. So you would say, Fede, what you're saying? Well, you can basically, if you believe in like a proper monk, you can basically get away with a lot of the Sotapanna systems, right? Or you can say, oh, I'm a stream enterer already, I left this, I have renunciation. Then you may be a bastard. That's okay. That's okay. But you may perfectly well be. Or if you're going to Dasamika, you make a very performative thing, like, oh, look at me, I'm being generous, or look at me, I'm being very patient, or I do a lot of effort. But we don't really know it. And you may say, well, but the cities, yes, but you can also get those cities outside of Buddhist context. You can get like a kind of Tumo. It's not exactly Tumo, but let's say a kind of Tumo. You can practice a Wim Hof method. You can do Stephen LaBerge, Dream Yoga, lucid dreaming to get Dream Yoga. There is a lot of things you can do in order to kind of mimic the cities, right? And this is also in the literature. One of the Buddha's problem with disease was, hey, Hindu yogis can also get them. So that's not necessarily a mark of it. But bodhicitta, true bodhicitta, you cannot fake it. It's very easy to see if you know how to look for it, and you will see it on people, and you will see people that are even people who teach tantra or things like this who really don't have it. And for me, those are people who do things technical. I don't think they really believe in tantra, because you can say mantras, you can teach visualizations, but unless you really believe them, it's not going to work. And how can you believe it if you don't believe in bodhicitta, which is like the root of all the tantras, right? It's the root. For example, people teaching Dzogchen, which are without saying bodhicitta or saying, oh, this is the same as Taoism and Hinduism. It's not. It's very clear, like in the Kungji Gyalpo, right? It's right there in the title. Bodhicitta is the key of everything. So if you feel increasing bodhicitta, you're going the right way. Even if you don't get any kind of cities, even if you are not outwardly very, very good a practitioner or very famous or not a monk, you're still going the right way. And if you don't have bodhicitta, for me, you kind of lost the way, even if you perform everything else. So I hope this clarifies a little bit, at least how I see it, and thank you for all your answers. Bye bye!